We were in Perak Dalet, the fourth Perak. Let's go again from Mishnah Tes, the ninth Mishnah.
Fourth chapter, number.
So this is, I think, really the end of Peah, and then we're going to transition into Leket, which we will define eventually. It's one of the interesting things about Mishnayos. We've mentioned Leket a few times now. We're going to start, when we actually get into it, then we'll begin to define it. So Mishnah Tes said, Misha Leket es a Peah, someone who picked up the Peah, V'amar harei zu le'ish pleni ani. And he says, I'm taking this for my friend the ani. So Rabbi Eliezer Eimer Zachalei, Rabbi Eliezer says that works because, like we spoke like yesterday, since there are some legal loopholes he could take advantage of.
He could be poor.
He could make himself poor by declaring all his property ownerless, and if something you could take for yourself, you could take for somebody else. So Rabbi Eliezer says, since technically he could take it, he could make himself able to take it, so he could take it for the other person. No, since he is not poor, he did not make himself poor, he cannot take it, so he can't take it for anybody else. So it's the property of the aniyim. The first ani he bumps into, he'd have to give it to. And then, halachic v'ashidcha v'peah shel evik echav. If a non-Jew keeps these halachas and leaves leket, shidcha, and or peah in his field, chayiv b'maiser. So the Mishnah says there's no problem with the poor people taking them, but
I got lost in the. How does that start?
Halachic v'ashidcha v'peah shel evik echavim.
Okay, got it.
Leket, shidcha, or peah left by a non-Jew who keeps any of these halachas. There's no problem with the poor people taking them, but chayiv b'maisris, the poor, when they take them, will have an obligation to give meiser from what they take, because it's viewed just as a present that this generous non-Jew is leaving things he's not obligated to, and if they take them, they'll have to give meiser. Elam kin hifker, unless the non-Jew just declares them ownerless. If he declares them ownerless, then they'll be like anything that's ownerless, that there's no obligation to give meiser from it, since it's equally available to the Levim as it is to anyone else. There would be no obligation of meiser. Okay, Mishnah Yud. Now we define Ezehu Leket. What is Leket? Leket is Hanaysher B'shas HaKetzira. It's the things that fall at the time of the harvest. Anything that falls to the ground is going to become Leket, and the poor people have a right to take that. However, Hayakaitzer Katzer Mali Yad, if he was harvesting a handful, or Tailish Mali Kumtsoi, or picking up a fistful, and he kites, and he gets stuck by a thorn. V'nafal miyado, so he drops the whole handful of aretz. Hariyusha balabayis, that's not leket. Leket isn't things that fall because of something that affected him unintentionally and made him drop something. Rather, it's he grabbed a fistful and out of his hand one or two fell. That would be leket. So tochayad v'teicha magal aniyim, something that falls from in his hand or in his sickle that he was using to cut, that for sure goes to the aniyim. Acher hayad v'acher magal, if something was behind his hand or behind the sickle and it got hit and then it fell that way, that's l'balabayas. That's, again, it's not something he dropped, that's something that got knocked down. That would not be leket. And then we have the in-between case. Rosh hayad v'rosh magal, if it was by his fingertips or by the very front end of the sickle, is that considered inside or outside? Rabbi Shmuel Shmuel considers it inside and says it would go to the aniyim, it would be leket. Rabbi Kiva Eimer Balabayas, Rabbi Kiva considers it outside and says it would go to the Balabayas. And finally, let's finish up the.
So the issue is, like, if I'm carrying something and I drop
and drop the whole bundle, that's not leket, right? It's only
leket.
You're carrying something and one thing falls out, so that's the stuff that accidentally falls when no one really notices. That's the leket. And Mishnah Yud Aleph, Chayri Anamolim Shabbateicha Kama, anthills that are where the grain is still standing. So then Harein Shel Balabayas, that grain, there's no problem. That for sure belongs to the owner of the field. That grain, any kernels you find in those anthills obviously came from the grain before it was harvested. What about Shel Acher HaKaitzrim? What about anthills that are in the already harvested part of the field? So there's grain in there. Obviously, the ants have been collecting it for a while. So how do you determine what should be considered possibly leket, that the ants just carried off kernels that fell, and what they carried off before? So the first Tana says, the top layer of grain that you give to the aniyim, and you figure that will cover all the leket that just got dropped. But anything on the bottom, anything lower down that the owner of the field would be able to keep. And Rav Meir Omer, no, hakol aniyim, you have to give everything to the aniyim. Shesafik leket, because when it's unclear whether it's leket or not, we assume it to be leket. So since there's no good way there's nothing indicative of where the layer of leket would end. So Rav Meir says you have to let the poor people take all of the grain.
Can you read the Rabbi Meir one more time?
Rav Meir says hakol aniyim, everything goes to the aniyim. Shesafik is when you have a doubt of leket, whether something's leket or not leket, we assume it to be leket.
Okay.
And so since there's no clear strata, you can't tell where the leket ends. So he says, okay, so the aniyim just get the whole anthill, they can have all of the grain in it. Okay, and hopefully tomorrow we will continue with the fifth parak.
Shkach.